Welcome to a place where the rain whispers secrets, and every drop carries a memory darker than the last. Tonight, as the storm rolls gently across your window and the steady rhythm of the rain calms your mind, I'll be sharing 10 true horror stories, each one deeply unsettling, each one recounted by those who swore they'd never forget what they experienced. These aren't urban legends or ghost tales passed down for fun. These are real encounters, real fear, real people. And in the silence between the thunder, you just might hear something watching you. So dim the lights. Wrap yourself in a blanket. Let the rain soothe you, but don't relax too much. Because what starts as a quiet night may soon feel like someone or something is in the room with you. The air in the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation's office was thick with the scent of old coffee and stale ambition. My desk, buried under stacks of yellowed case files, seemed to groan under the weight of forgotten tragedies. But that morning, in April 2003, something shifted. My supervisory agent, a grizzled man with eyes like chipped flint, dropped a bombshell. I was being considered for a new unit, one tasked with breathing life into cold cases, murders so old they'd been left to rot in the archives. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, not from fear, but from the weight of what it meant to chase ghosts no one else cared about. Could I really disturb the dust of decades-old crimes and find justice where others had failed? I'd spent years in major crimes chasing killers with fresh blood on their hands, kicking down doors and hauling them to jail in cuffs that gleamed under the Mississippi sun. That was the life I craved, loud and alive, with the thrill of the hunt. Cold cases, they were for old-timers, men with gray hair and patience I didn't have. I was hungry, not for paperwork, but for the pulse of action. Yet my SSA saw something in me. "Your drive," he said, leaning across my desk, his voice low and deliberate. "It's what we need to crack these cases. You could make a name for yourself, maybe even lead a team." His words sank into me like a hook tugging at my pride. I couldn't say no, not when he framed it like a challenge. The cold case unit was a pilot scheme, a gamble by the Public Safety Commissioner to show Mississippi could tackle its unsolved crimes. In the summer of 2004, we held our first meeting in a cramped conference room, the air heavy with the smell of mildew and bureaucracy. Our job was simple but brutal: sift through stacks of unsolved violent crime files, pick the ones with a sliver of hope, and convince the district attorney to prosecute if we found a suspect. It sounded noble, but I quickly learned the truth. DAs didn't care about old murders unless they made headlines. They served the voters, not the dead. Every case we touched needed a rubber stamp, and that stamp was hard to get. I felt like a grave digger, unearthing stories of pain, only to be told to bury them again. My first case landed like a punch to the gut. A Jane Doe found in Marshall County in 1993, her body torn apart and stuffed into trash bags. The image of those bags, heavy with human remains, haunted me. I saw them in my dreams, lying under the pines, their plastic glinting in the moonlight. I wasn't ready for how personal this would get, how her story would claw its way into my soul. But I was in now, and there was no turning back. The unit was my proving ground, and Jane Doe was my first test. I had to find her killer, no matter how deep the shadows hid him. You don't choose the cases that change you. They choose you. And this one had my name written all over it. The details of Jane Doe's case hit me like a freight train. In 1993, a truck driver pulled over on a lonely stretch of Marshall County Highway to relieve himself. He wandered into the trees, expecting privacy, but instead found 2 black trash bags, bloated and reeking of death. The stench was unmistakable. He later told police, a sickly, rotting odor that reminded him of his childhood cat, its corpse festering under the house. He didn't touch the bags. He didn't need to. He knew what was inside. By the time the highway patrol arrived, the scene was taped off, and forensics confirmed the worst. A young woman dismembered her torso and arms in one bag, legs in another. Her head, hands, and feet were gone, vanished. The brutality of it made my stomach churn. Who could do this? And why? The autopsy painted a grim picture. Jane Doe was between 17 and 25, her body marked by abrasions on her knees and lower back signs she'd likely worked the streets. Track marks scarred her arms, and puncture wounds dotted her groin, evidence of years spent chasing a high. Toxicology showed a cocktail of drugs: oxycodone, demerol cocaine, methamphetamine, and a synthetic psychedelic called 2CB. She'd been drowning in addiction when she died, her life already a kind of death. I couldn't stop picturing her alone, vulnerable, her final moments, a blur of pain and terror. The image lodged in my mind a relentless loop. Her body hacked apart, discarded like garbage. Investigators at the time had one lead: boot prints size 12 Red Wings leading from the highway to the dump site and back. They pointed to George Jones, a serial killer serving life for murdering 3 prostitutes in the 80s and early 90s. His M.O. fit same victim profile, same savage violence. The boots matched his size, his brand. It seemed open and shut. But as I pored over the files, something felt off. Jones was a monster, no doubt, but his killings were frenzied, chaotic, driven by meth-fueled rage. Jane Doe's dismemberment was different, calculated, almost clinical. Her head, hands, and feet were removed to hide her identity, not to satisfy some twisted urge. Jones hacked his victims while they were alive. Jane Doe was already dead when the knife touched her. I sat at my desk, the case file spread before me, its pages brittle and stained. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows. I could feel her presence, this nameless girl, whispering from the grave. Find me. Know me. The thought gripped me cold and unyielding. I wasn't just chasing a killer. I was chasing her story, her truth. The boot prints were a clue, but they weren't enough. I needed more. I needed to know who she was before the world threw her away. The DA wouldn't touch this case without a suspect, but I couldn't let it go. Not yet. Not ever. Her body was in pieces, but her story was still whole. I just had to find it. The deeper I dug into Jane Doe's case, the more I felt the walls closing in. George Jones was the easy answer, the one everyone wanted to believe. He was already behind bars, a tidy solution to a messy crime. But the inconsistencies gnawed at me. Jones's truck tachometer, a device that tracked his routes, showed he was nowhere near Marshall County when Jane Doe's body was dumped. His other victims from 92 and 94 were mutilated in a frenzy, their bodies left intact, except for wild, haphazard cuts. Jane Doe's dismemberment was deliberate, her missing parts a calculated effort to erase her identity. Jones didn't care about covering his tracks. He reveled in the chaos. This killer was different, methodical, patient, and terrifyingly precise. I sat in the archives surrounded by towering shelves of case files, the air thick with dust and despair. Each file was a life, a story cut short, and Jane Doe's was just one among thousands. But she was mine now. I traced the boot prints in my mind, those size 12 red wings leading to nowhere. They were the only physical evidence, but they weren't enough to pin on Jones. His defense team had hammered that point at his trial, and the jury agreed, convicting him of 3 murders, but not Jane Doe's. The DA had been content to let her case go cold, assuming Jones was the guy. I wasn't so sure. Something about this felt personal, like the killer knew her, wanted her forgotten. I started to question everything. What if the boot prints weren't Jones's? What if they belonged to someone else? Someone who'd walked that highway with purpose. The thought sent a shiver through me. I imagined the killer standing over her body, the night air heavy with pine and decay, his hands steady as he carved away her identity. It wasn't rage. It was control. I could feel the weight of his intent, the cold calculation in every cut. I needed to know who she was, because that's where the answers lay. A name could lead to a life, and a life could lead to a killer. I decided to bend the rules. The DA wouldn't approve reopening the case without a suspect, so I implied I was close to linking Jones definitively. It was a lie, but a necessary one. I couldn't let Jane Doe stay a ghost. I requested access to missing persons records, focusing on young women aged 17 to 25, fair-haired reported missing between 1988 and 1993. The criteria were narrow, but I had to start somewhere. The special agents at Missing Persons were skeptical, warning me that prostitutes rarely got reported. But I clung to hope. Someone somewhere had to miss her. Someone had to care. Her killer thought he could erase her. I was going to prove him wrong. The search for Jane Doe's identity was like chasing a shadow through a storm. I spent days hunched over a computer in the missing persons office, the screen's glow burning my eyes as I sifted through digitized records, names, faces, dates hundreds of young women, lost to the world, their stories reduced to lines of text. Each one could be her, but none felt right. The air was stifling, the hum of the machine, a constant reminder of time slipping away. I could almost hear her voice, faint and pleading, "Find me. Don't let me fade." It drove me forward, past exhaustion, past doubt. I narrowed my search to fair-haired girls with histories of drug use or prostitution, hoping to match Jane Doe's profile. The list was heartbreakingly short. Too many like her were never reported, their lives invisible, even before death. I started contacting families, tracking down old phone numbers, knocking on doors in small towns across Mississippi. Each call, each visit, was a gamble. I asked about scars, tattoos, anything that could match the autopsy photos. Most families were reluctant, their voices heavy with grief or suspicion. I was a stranger stirring up old wounds, but I couldn't stop. Jane Doe deserved a name. Then a breakthrough. A woman in Hattiesburg answered my call, her voice trembling as she spoke of her stepdaughter, missing since 1991. She described a fair-haired girl, 18 at the time, with a small scar above her right elbow from a childhood accident. My heart raced as I pulled up the autopsy photos. There it was, a faint, crescent-shaped mark above Jane Doe's elbow. It wasn't conclusive, but it was close. Too close to ignore. I showed the woman a cropped photo of the scar, careful not to reveal the horror of the full image. She gasped, her voice breaking. "That's her. I'm almost sure." I felt a surge of hope, but also dread. If this was her, the truth was about to get darker. I needed DNA to confirm. The stepmother wasn't a blood relative, and the girl's father had vanished years ago, likely overwhelmed by her disappearance. But they had a younger daughter, a half-sister. A DNA test could show a 25% match if Jane Doe was the missing girl. I arranged for the test, my hands shaking as I sealed the samples. This was it, the moment that could give her back her name. Days later, the results came in no match. 0%. I stared at the report, my chest tight with disbelief. The scar, the age, the hair, it all fit. How could this be wrong? I felt her slipping away again, back into the void. She was so close to being found. But the truth was hiding something worse. The DNA results hit me like a betrayal. I'd been so sure, so certain that Jane Doe was the missing stepdaughter. The scar above her elbow, the timeline, it all aligned. But science didn't lie, and the 0% match mocked my instincts. I sat in my office, the case file open, Jane Doe's autopsy photos staring back at me. Her scar seemed to pulse under the fluorescent light. A silent accusation. I'd failed her, but then a question slithered into my mind, cold and insidious. What if the stepdaughter wasn't the father's biological child? The thought felt like a crack in the case, a fracture that could lead to the truth or to madness. I called the stepmother again, probing gently. Had she ever met her husband's first wife? No, she said, her voice heavy with memory. She died after giving birth. He didn't like to talk about it. Something about her tone, the way it wavered, set my nerves on edge. I dug into the father's background, starting with his social security number, which the stepmother provided from old documents. I ran it through state databases, expecting to find adoption records or some innocent explanation. Instead, I found a ghost. The number didn't match the father's name. It belonged to someone else, a man with a criminal history, indecent exposure, and attempted kidnapping of a minor. My blood ran cold. The mugshot of this man, this predator, matched the father's description perfectly. He'd served 6 years of an 11-year sentence, then disappeared. A year later, he resurfaced across the country with a little girl he claimed was his daughter. I saw it now, the pieces falling into place like a house of cards collapsing. The stepdaughter wasn't his by blood. She might not even have been legally his. Was she kidnapped? Adopted under false pretenses? The possibilities were sickening, each one darker than the last. I imagined her as a child trapped with a man who hid his past, her life, built on a lie. The stepmother's story took on new weight. She'd said the girl's relationship with her father soured before she vanished in 1991 at 18. He'd resisted filing a missing persons report, claiming it was a defeat, a failure as a father. Then, in August 1993, the day after Jane Doe's body was found, he left his family, leaving only a note. "I'm sorry, the timing was too perfect, too damning. I felt it in my gut, a certainty as sharp as a blade. He killed her. He'd dumped her body, erased her identity, and fled when the missing persons report threatened to expose him. The Red Wing boot prints weren't Jones's. They were his. I saw his face in my mind, a coward hiding behind a stolen name, his hands stained with her blood. The realization hit me like a bullet between the eyes. Jane Doe's killer wasn't a serial killer like George Jones. He was closer, crueler, a man who'd lived a lie, raised a girl as his own, then snuffed her out when she became a threat. I sat in my car outside the stepmother's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to keep my composure. I wanted to tell her to shatter the fragile narrative she'd built around her family. But how do you tell a woman her husband was a monster, that the girl she loved might have been a victim of his predation long before her murder? The words stuck in my throat, heavy as lead. I took my findings to the Major Crimes Unit, the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, anyone who'd listen. The father's false identity, his criminal past, the timing of his disappearance. It was enough to spark a manhunt. But without a body tied to a name, without concrete evidence, it was just a theory. A strong one, but not enough for the DA. I pictured him, this faceless predator, slipping through the cracks, living under a new name, while Jane Doe's grave remained unmarked. The injustice burned a fire in my chest that wouldn't die. I'd been so close, so damn close to giving her justice. I closed the case, placing it back in the cold case stack, its pages heavier than ever. I moved on to other files, other victims, but Jane Doe never left me. Her scar, her story, her silence, they haunted my dreams. A relentless reminder of my failure. I work at the State Criminal Information Center. Now, a slower job, far from the chaos of cold cases. But I carry her with me, a weight I can't shed. I check the FBI's most wanted list, sometimes hoping to see his name, hoping someone somewhere will find him. Justice for Jane Doe isn't just a case, it's a debt I owe her. She's still out there, a ghost in the system, waiting for someone to speak her name. It was Christmas, and the warmth of the season was supposed to wrap us in comfort. But something else lingered, an unease I couldn't shake. I'm Terry from Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin, and I've always been drawn to the shadows of true crime, the kind of stories that make your pulse race, and your skin crawl. That night, surrounded by the clinking of glasses and the murmur of relatives, I met my uncle, a man old enough to be my grandfather, his eyes carrying the weight of 50 years in law enforcement. His hands, rough and scarred, clutched a glass of whiskey as if it were an anchor to the past. My aunt, with a knowing glint in her eye, nudged me toward him, whispering that he had stories that would make my blood run cold. What was the worst thing you ever saw? I asked, my voice barely steady, expecting a tale of gore or violence. But his sigh was heavy, his gaze distant. And when he spoke, it wasn't about blood or bodies. It was about something far worse. The scariest thing wasn't a crime scene, Terry. It was the moment I realized the people meant to protect us could hide the truth. My heart stuttered. This wasn't the story I expected, and that made it all the more terrifying. The room seemed to dim as he began, his voice low, pulling me into a world where trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered. He'd been a Wisconsin state patrolman for decades, a badge-wearing guardian who faced death without flinching. Car accidents that left families in pieces, murder scenes where the walls screamed with pain. None of it scared him. He had a gun, a radio, and backup to keep fear at bay. But when he retired and became a private investigator, everything changed. No badge, no army of officers to call. Just him alone, chasing shadows in a world that didn't play fair. You think you know fear when a gun's pointed at your face, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. But real terror is when you see the system you trusted turn against the people it swore to serve. I leaned closer, the festive chatter fading into a dull hum, my mind racing with questions. What could shake a man like this? What could make him doubt the very institution he'd served for half a century? His story wasn't just a tale, it was a descent into a nightmare where justice was buried under lies. As he spoke, I felt the room grow colder, the fire in the hearth no longer enough to warm me. He described a case from 2013 when he was hired to reinvestigate a murder from 1983 in downtown Milwaukee. A young woman, her body tossed off a bridge like discarded trash, her killer never found. The family, desperate for answers, turned to his PI firm, hoping to unearth the truth the police had failed to find. I thought it would be simple, he said, his voice cracking like brittle ice. Get the case file, dig through the evidence, find a lead. But when he called the Milwaukee PD, the response was a stone wall. Days turned into weeks, and the file never came. Each call was met with excuses, delays, and a growing sense of dread. Something was wrong, Terry. I could feel it in my bones. The festive lights twinkled mockingly as I hung on his every word, my stomach twisting. This wasn't just a lost file. It was a cover-up, a deliberate erasure of a woman's final moments. And as he continued, I realized this story would haunt me far more than any blood-soaked crime scene ever could. The dining room faded, and I was no longer at a family gathering. My uncle's words painted a world where truth was a ghost slipping through your fingers just when you thought you had it. The Milwaukee PD told me they couldn't find the file. He said, his voice a low growl, like he was reliving the frustration. A murder case, 30 years old, and they claimed it was just gone. My mind reeled. How does a file for an unsolved murder vanish? I pictured dusty shelves in a police basement, boxes stuffed with the stories of the dead, each one a life demanding justice. But this file for a woman whose name was now just a whisper had disappeared, as if it had never existed. My uncle's eyes darkened, and I could feel the weight of his suspicion pressing against my chest. They didn't misplace it, Terry. They didn't want me to see it. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and cold, slicing through the holiday cheer like a blade. He described calling the department, repeatedly, each conversation more infuriating than the last. First, it was, "We're still looking." Then a captain got on the line, his voice slick with false politeness, suggesting my uncle might have contacted the wrong department. Can you imagine? He spat his fist, tightening around his glass. A captain acting like I didn't know my job. I could almost hear the phone line crackling with tension. The captain's voice dodging, weaving anything to keep my uncle at bay. Finally, after weeks of silence, the truth clawed its way out. The file wasn't lost. It had been destroyed. In the 1990s, someone at Milwaukee PD decided to clear space by torching evidence from unsolved cases. 50 files. Terry, 50 lives erased, like they didn't matter. My heart pounded as I imagined those boxes, each one holding a story of pain and loss, reduced to ash for the sake of storage space. The absurdity of it hit me like a punch. Cardboard boxes cost pennies. Why destroy evidence from cases that could still be solved? My uncle leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. It wasn't about space. Someone wanted those files gone. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, the kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew. He'd destroyed evidence himself as a patrolman, but only for closed cases, and always with meticulous checks. This was different. This was deliberate. You don't accidentally burn unsolved murder files, he said, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and fear. You do that when you're hiding something. My mind raced with possibilities. corrupt cops, powerful figures, secrets too dangerous to uncover. The woman's body, thrown off that bridge, seemed to scream for answers. But the system had silenced her. As my uncle's words sank in, I realized the true horror wasn't the murder. It was the betrayal of trust, the idea that those meant to serve justice could bury it instead. The fire in the dining room crackled, but it couldn't warm the cold dread settling in my bones. My uncle's story was no longer just a tale. It was a labyrinth of deceit, and I was lost in its depths. When I read that headline in the Green Bay Gazette, I thought it was a mistake, he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. Milwaukee police destroyed DNA, murder evidence. I could picture him sitting in his quiet retirement home, the newspaper trembling in his hands as the words burned into his mind. The article confirmed what he'd suspected. In the mid-1990s, Milwaukee PD had destroyed around 50 evidence files from unsolved cases, claiming a lack of storage space. Storage space. He repeated, his voice dripping with scorn, as if a few boxes were worth more than a life. My heart clenched as I imagined those families waiting decades for justice, only to learn their loved ones' stories had been reduced to nothing. The details were maddening. The department admitted the destruction was a mistake, that someone had accidentally included unsolved cases in the purge. But my uncle wasn't buying it. You don't destroy evidence like that by accident, he said, his eyes narrowing. You pick up each file, read the label, decide its fate. Someone chose those cases. I felt my breath catch the room spinning as I tried to process the implications. Were they covering for someone? A killer, a cop, a politician. The possibilities swirled like a storm, each one more terrifying than the last. My uncle described the public outrage, the families suing the department. But the Milwaukee PD's response was a weak apology, a shrug from men long retired. No one was held accountable. Terry, not a single soul. The injustice of it burned in my chest, a rage mixed with fear that the system could fail so completely. I asked him what he thought the files contained, why they'd been destroyed. He paused, his gaze distant, as if staring into the abyss of his own memories. DNA evidence was becoming big in the 90s, he said. It was changing everything. Maybe someone didn't want those cases reopened, didn't want new tests run. My mind flashed to crime shows where a single strand of hair could crack a case wide open. What if those files held the key to catching a killer who was still out there, walking free? What if they pointed to someone inside the department? The thought was a cold hand around my heart, squeezing tight. You spend your life believing the system works, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then you see, it betray the very people it's meant to protect. I felt trapped in his words, unable to escape the image of a faceless figure, torch in hand, burning away the truth to protect a lie. The festive lights in the dining room seemed to flicker, as if the story itself was draining their warmth. My uncle's voice was a quiet thunder, each word pulling me deeper into a world where justice was a myth. That case, that woman, they never got their answers, he said, his hands trembling slightly. And neither did I. I could see the weight of it in his eyes, the kind of burden that doesn't fade with time. He'd gone into that investigation thinking he could bring closure, but instead, he'd uncovered a wound that refused to heal. The destroyed files weren't just paper. They were lives, stories, screams silenced by someone's deliberate hand. I keep thinking about her family, he said. They came to us, trusted us, and we failed them. My chest tightened as I imagined those parents' siblings waiting for a call that would never come, their hope snuffed out like a candle in the wind. He leaned back, his face etched with a sorrow that felt alive, like it was breathing in the room with us. You know what scares me most, Terry? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. It's not the idea of a killer out there. It's the thought that the people we trust to catch them might be the ones letting them go. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, the kind that makes you want to lock every door and never trust again. The Milwaukee PD's excuse storage space was a flimsy veil over a darker truth. Someone had picked those files, carried them to the shredder, watched them burn. Was it incompetence or something more sinister? My uncle believed it was the latter, and I couldn't help but agree. You don't destroy 50 unsolved cases by mistake, he said, his voice hard. You do it to hide something big. My mind raced with images of corrupt cops, secret deals, a killer shielded by a badge. The woman's body, tossed off that bridge, seemed to loom in the shadows, demanding to be remembered. As the night wore on, the story clung to me like damp fog. My uncle's words echoed in my mind, each one a reminder that the world wasn't as safe as I'd believed. I've seen a lot, Terry, he said, finishing his whiskey. But nothing scared me like realizing the system could betray us all. I walked away from that Christmas dinner, changed the holiday cheer, replaced by a gnawing fear. The police were supposed to be our protectors. But what happens when they're the ones hiding the truth? The woman from 1983, her family, their pain, they were ghosts now haunting a system that had failed them. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the thought that somewhere out there, a killer was still free, laughing at the ashes of justice. In the damp grey heart of Whitby, northwestern England, I, Andrew, carved out a living as a private investigator. For 22 years, I'd walked the line between law and chaos, never wearing a badge, but carrying the weight of one. The Security Industry Authority handed me a license after a grueling course, and that was that no police experience needed just a knack for sniffing out truths buried in lies. My early days were humble an apprenticeship under a grizzled ex-CID detective, shadowing him through rain-soaked streets, fetching tea and filing reports. But those mundane tasks were my baptism into a world of fractured lives and hidden motives. By the end of that year, I was no longer the errand boy. I was part of the team, trusted to unravel the knots of human desperation. Cases came and went, some dull, others soul-crushing, but none ever gripped me with fear until her call, a mother voice trembling like a leaf in a storm, begged me to find her son Daniel, who'd vanished for nearly a year. His last message, a cryptic text from his phone, claimed he was starting anew, but the words felt hollow, like a script written by someone else. Feel the chill of that moment, the weight of a mother's hope pressing against your chest. I took the case, not knowing it would lead me to a place where trust was a luxury and danger lurked in every glance. The mother, Ellen, sat across from me in my cramped office, her hands twisting a frayed tissue into knots. Her eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, told a story of sleepless nights and unanswered questions. Daniel, her only son, had been gone for 10 months. At first, he'd disappeared without a trace, leaving her to drown in worry. Then, 4 months in a text arrived from his number. "I'm fine, Mum. Need a fresh start. Don't worry." But the words didn't sound like him. No warmth, no trace of the boy who'd call her every Sunday. She'd tried to reach him, but he refused to speak, claiming her voice would break him. Picture her now, clutching her phone, hoping for a sign that never comes. Ellen had gone to the police, who listed Daniel as a missing person, but when she reported the text, they struck him from the register, dismissing it as family drama. She fought to reinstate the report, calling relentlessly, only to be met with apathy. The police eventually traced his phone to a cluster of mobile towers near a small junction, a place with a kebab shop, a betting parlor, and a pub that reeked of trouble. Patrons at the pub claimed to have seen Daniel sipping lager at the bar, but no one could confirm it. Ellen's voice broke as she told me she felt him slipping away, as if the world was swallowing him whole. You can feel it, can't you? The dread of knowing something's wrong, but no one believes you. The pub was my starting point. A squat, grimy building tucked in a courtyard where the air felt thick with suspicion. Step inside and let the stench of stale beer and cigarette smoke choke your senses. The moment I crossed the threshold, eyes turned to me, hard, unyielding stares from men who looked like they'd seen too much and said too little. 4 lads outside cigarettes, glowing like predators' eyes, watched me in silence as I passed. Inside, the barmaid, her face etched with distrust, sized me up. "You a copper?" she asked, her voice sharp as broken glass. I shook my head, ordered a lemonade, and showed her Daniel's photo. Her eyes flickered with recognition, but she claimed she hadn't seen him in months. Feel the weight of their gazes, each one a warning to turn back. I moved through the pub, questioning patrons. Some shrugged, others sneered. One told me to get lost, but at a corner table, 5 men in expensive jackets, Stone Island Barber, names that screamed money in a place that stank of poverty, caught my eye. They were different. Their confidence, a quiet threat. I showed them Daniel's picture, and the shortest one with salt and pepper hair, and a voice like gravel spoke up. "Kid was into drugs, mate. Always in trouble. If he's gone, he probably owes someone big." His words were casual, but his eyes were cold, calculating. You know that feeling when the air shifts and you realize you're not the hunter, you're the prey. As I nursed my lemonade, I noticed the pub's rhythm, men slipping to the toilets in pairs, returning with wild eyes and twitching hands. See it in your mind, the furtive glances, the hushed deals, the pulse of something sinister beneath the surface. The 5 men at the corner table didn't move their presence, a dark anchor in the chaos. A scruffy lad approached them, whispered something, and was met with icy stares before slinking away. I knew I'd get nothing more here. Not yet. Outside in the smoky courtyard, a woman approached, her voice raspy, asking for a cigarette. I didn't smoke, but when she begged for change, I saw an opportunity. Listen closely now, because this is where the game changes. I offered her 20 quid, promising more if she could be my eyes and ears inside that pub. She was a user. Her sunken cheeks and trembling hands told me that, but desperation made her honest. She confirmed my suspicions. The 5 men were drug lords, never dealing directly, but pulling strings through lackeys. Daniel had been a customer, and the last time she saw him, he'd clashed with one of their mid-level dealers. Feel the jolt of that revelation, like a door creaking open to a truth you're not ready to face. I gave her my number, told her to watch and listen, but never ask questions. She nodded, her eyes glinting with the promise of cash, and I left, knowing I'd just made a pact with a ghost. Hours later, my phone buzzed. It was her, the woman from the courtyard, her voice low and urgent. Close your eyes and hear it, the tremor of someone who's seen too much. She'd overheard the 5 men talking about me. There's a fella askin' about you-know-who, one said, and the newest arrival, a sharply dressed man, replied, stick to the story. That was it, but it was enough. Feel the ice in your veins as you realize they know you're hunting them. I pressed her for more, but she had nothing else yet. I promised more money, urging her to keep listening. Days passed, and her updates grew sparse. She'd heard nothing about Daniel, nothing about me. Disappointment gnawed at me, but I kept her on, slipping her cash in a supermarket car park. Then one evening, she hesitated before leaving my car. Pay attention now, because this is where the puzzle starts to form. She'd noticed the short man with salt and pepper hair, the one who spoke for the group, using an old flip phone, odd for someone who flashed top-tier iPhones. He was secretive, hiding it under the table. Picture it, a man who controls everything, suddenly cautious, clutching a relic that doesn't belong. I knew then Daniel's phone. It had to be. The texts to his mother, the refusal to speak. It was him keeping Daniel's ghost alive to throw us off. I called Ellen, my heart pounding, as I asked if Daniel had contacted her recently. She hadn't heard from him in weeks, confirming my fear. The flip phone was his, and the dealer was using it to weave a lie. Feel the ground shift beneath you, the truth so close you can taste it. I couldn't storm the pub. Private investigators don't get warrants. So I changed tactics. I stopped shaving, traded my suit for a hoodie, and became a shadow in that pub. See yourself there, blending into the haze, watching predators who think they're untouchable. I'd slip in during peak hours, sit in a corner, and dial Daniel's number, eyes locked on the table of 5. 5 times the calls went to voicemail. On the 6th, it rang. Hold your breath as the world slows down. The short man reached into his pocket, glanced at something hidden, and the call cut to voicemail. I dialed again. He pulled out the flip phone, held it under the table, and declined the call. The 3rd time, the phone didn't ring at all. He'd turned it off. Feel the rush, the certainty that you've caught them, but the dread that it's not enough. I was so close, but I needed more, something the police couldn't ignore. I called the detective in charge, my voice shaking with urgency. Listen to the desperation in your own voice as you plead for justice. I laid out everything: the pub, the dealers, the flip phone, my theory that Daniel was gone, maybe dead, and they were covering it up. She listened, her tone heavy with skepticism. The pub was a known drug den, but a flip phone wasn't evidence. Impersonating Daniel was cruel, but not illegal. Without a body, a confession, or hard proof, her hands were tied. Feel the rage bubble up, the injustice of it all choking you. I went back to Ellen, my heart breaking as I told her I believed something terrible had happened to Daniel, and those men were involved. She wept, her sobs echoing in my ears long after I left. That case haunts me still, a wound that never heals. Close your eyes and see her face, a mother robbed of answers. I check the news sometimes, hoping for a breakthrough, a name anything. But the pub still stands, its secrets buried in the shadows, and I'm left with the bitter truth that some monsters walk free, while a mother waits for a son who'll never come home. Two shallow pits gaped beneath the crimson cloth, clawing at my sanity, like a predator in the dark. My friend Sarah and I froze on the Appalachian Trail, our breaths caught in the humid Vermont air as the red shirt swayed mockingly from a branch. It wasn't just litter, it was a marker, a sinister beacon in the wilderness. The forest, once alive with birdsong, now pulsed with an eerie silence, as if the trees themselves held their breath, waiting for us to uncover their secret. My pulse thundered, urging me to run, but my feet rooted to the earth. What kind of monster leaves graves in the middle of nowhere? The afternoon sun bled through the canopy, casting jagged shadows across the trail. Sarah and I had been hiking for 3 days, our boots caked with mud, our spirits high from the thrill of the Glastonbury section. We laughed about sore muscles and debated who could eat more trail mix, the rhythm of our steps, a comforting constant. But then Sarah stopped dead, her finger pointing off trail. Look at that. A flash of red, unnatural against the green, hung 20 yards away, snagged on a low branch. My stomach twisted, not with hunger, but with a primal unease. Litter was common, but this felt deliberate, like a warning etched in blood. We exchanged a glance, her hazel eyes mirroring my own suspicion. "Who leaves a shirt out here?" she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid the forest might hear. I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but my skin prickled. "Keep moving," my mind whispered yet, curiosity pulled us off the path, our boots crunching through underbrush. The air grew heavier, thick, with the scent of damp earth and pine as we approached the cloth. It wasn't just a shirt. It was a marker pinned with purpose. My heart thudded louder, each step sinking me deeper into a story I wasn't sure I wanted to read. Beneath the red fabric, the ground was scarred. 2 rectangular patches of disturbed earth lay side by side, each about 6 feet long and 2 feet wide, graves unmistakably. The dirt was freshly turned darker than the surrounding soil, as if someone had clawed it open hours ago. My breath hitched, and Sarah's hand gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "This isn't right," she whispered, her voice trembling. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the pits. They weren't deep, but they were precise, intentional. Someone dug these for a reason. My mind raced, conjuring images of hikers like us, lured off trail, never seen again. The forest seemed to close in branches, creaking like whispered threats. I tried to laugh it off, to break the tension, but my voice cracked. "Maybe it's just kids messing around," I said, but the words felt hollow. Sarah shook her head, her face pale. "Kids don't dig graves. Not like this." She was right. The precision of the cuts, the deliberate placement of the shirt, it screamed purpose. My chest tightened as I scanned the trees, half expecting eyes to glint from the shadows. "Run. Get out now." But we didn't. We stood there, trapped by the weight of what we'd found, our minds spiraling into the same terrifying question. Were these meant for us? The red shirt fluttered in a sudden breeze, its edges frayed like a warning flag. I imagined the person who placed it, their hands stained with dirt, their eyes cold with intent. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head, a story he'd told me as a kid, about hunters who vanished in these woods, their gear found, but never their bodies. "The forest keeps its secrets," he'd said. I hadn't believed him then, but now standing before those empty graves, I felt the truth of his words sink into my bones. Sarah tugged at my sleeve. "We need to go," she said, her voice urgent. I nodded, but my feet felt glued to the earth, as if the graves were pulling me closer, whispering for me to stay. We tore ourselves away from the graves. Our steps hurried almost frantic as we rejoined the trail. The forest, once a sanctuary, now felt like a predator's lair. Every rustle, a footstep, every shadow, a threat. Sarah's breath came in short gasps, her eyes darting to the trees. "What if they're watching us?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of my own heart. I didn't answer. couldn't. My mind was a storm of fear, replaying the image of those pits, their edges sharp as a promise. 2 graves. 2 of us. The coincidence clawed at my sanity, urging me to sprint, to scream, to do anything but walk calmly. We pushed toward Bennington, the nearest town, our pace relentless. The trail stretched endlessly, each bend hiding potential danger. My flashlight bounced in my pack, useless in the fading daylight. But I clutched the strap like a lifeline. Sarah's face was a buoy of determination, but her trembling hands betrayed her. "We should have called 911, she said, her voice cracking. I shook my head. No signal out here. We need to get to town. The logic felt flimsy, but it was all we had. The graves had shattered our sense of safety, and every step away from them felt like a gamble with fate. In my mind, I saw the graves filling first with dirt, then with bodies. A story my uncle once told me surfaced, unbidden. A hiker in these woods found months later, buried shallowly under a pile of leaves. They never caught who did it. He'd said, his voice heavy with warning. I pushed the thought away, focusing on the trail, but the forest seemed to mock us. A branch snapped behind us, and we both froze, spinning to face nothing but empty trees. Just an animal, I muttered, but my voice shook. Sarah's eyes were wide, her lips pressed tight. Keep moving, don't stop. The command pulsed in my head, driving us forward. When we reached Bennington, the town's lights felt like salvation. We found a payphone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. The officer listened patiently, his voice calm but distant, promising to investigate. He gave me his number, a gesture meant to reassure, but it did little to quell the dread pooling in my gut. Sarah and I debated continuing our hike, but the graves loomed in our minds, their emptiness more terrifying than if they'd been filled. There could be more, I said, my voice low. More graves, more markers. Someone's out there. Sarah nodded, her face grim. We checked into a motel, the sterile room, a stark contrast to the wild, menacing forest. The next day, I called the sheriff. He hadn't checked the site yet, promising action soon. His casual tone infuriated me, but I thanked him, masking my fear with politeness. Sarah and I agreed to end our trip. The Appalachian Trail, once a dream, now felt like a trap. As we drove home, the red shirt haunted me. Its crimson glow burned into my memory. Someone's watching it, seemed to say, and they're still out there. My friend Jake and I had been trudging through the Appalachian Trail for days, our boots sinking into the earth, our bodies aching from the relentless climb. By the fourth afternoon, exhaustion gnawed at us, but the promise of a 2-story shelter, whispered to us by a lone hiker we'd met earlier, kept us moving. Feel the weight of those words. A shelter, a sanctuary. But as the sun dipped below the ridgeline, casting jagged shadows through the trees, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your pulse quicken. Your eyes dart to every flicker of movement. We reached the shelter just as dusk bled into night. A rickety wooden structure with 2 raised platforms, not the cozy cabin we'd imagined, but a haven nonetheless. The air inside was stale thick with the musk of old wood and tar earth. We claimed the higher platform, tossing our packs up with a thud that echoed in the hollow space. Jake, ever the optimist, grinned and said, "Finally, a real bed." But I couldn't shake the unease. The sense that the forest was watching us, its eyes hidden in the dark. Close your eyes and imagine it, the stillness, the creeping dread, the feeling you're not alone. As we cooked a meager dinner over a flickering stove, the crunch of footsteps broke the silence. 2 figures emerged from float 1, from the trail, a man and a woman, their faces shadowed, but tense, like they'd been arguing for miles. I exchanged a glance with Jake. "Looks like we've got company," I muttered, trying to keep my voice light. They asked if the lower platform was free, and we nodded, welcoming the distraction. The man, broad-shouldered and quiet, introduced himself as Tom, and the woman, with sharp eyes and a clipped tone, was Sarah. They were a couple, that much was clear, but their bickering was immediate, a low hum of tension that soured the air. Words have power. Their anger felt like a storm brewing, ready to break. Their whispers carried on the wind, sharp and bitter, as they settled onto the lower platform. Sarah's voice cut through the night, accusing Tom of never listening, while he snapped back about distances and time. I tried to focus on the crackle of our fire, but their words were like splinters under my skin, pricking at my nerves. Jake muttered under his breath, "Jesus, just break it up already." And I stifled a laugh, hoping they hadn't heard. But Sarah's head snapped toward us, her eyes blazing. "What's so funny?" she demanded, and Tom had to pull her back, his voice low but strained. Feel the tension, thick as fog, wrapping around us all. The shelter, meant to be our refuge, felt like a cage, trapping us with their raw, unraveling emotions. By the time we crawled into our sleeping bags, the air was heavy with unspoken resentment, and sleep came fitfully, haunted by the forest's unyielding silence. The night pressed against the shelter, a suffocating blanket of darkness that swallowed every sound. What would you do if you woke to a scream in the wilderness? I jolted awake, my heart hammering, as Sarah's voice pierced the quiet. Not a whisper now, but a low, furious yell. Maybe that's exactly what I'll do. She snapped, her words slicing through the stillness. I lay frozen, staring at the rough wooden ceiling as the sounds of movement followed the rustle of her pack, the creak of the ladder as she descended. Tom's voice chased her pleading. "Don't do this, Sarah." But her flashlight's beam cut through the dark as she stormed onto the trail alone. I sat up, my breath shallow, and nudged Jake. "She's leaving," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding in my chest. Picture it, a woman alone, vanishing into a forest that feels alive with menace. Jake, groggy but alarmed, leaned over the platform's edge. "Excuse me, miss. I wouldn't do that." He called, his tone urgent. Sarah's response was a sharp curse flung back like a blade, and we exchanged a nervous chuckle, trying to mask our growing unease. Tom stayed on his platform, muttering, "If she wants to leave, let her." But his voice trembled, betraying his bravado. I couldn't shake the image of her flashlight fading into the trees, a fragile glow swallowed by the vast, hungry dark. Feel the weight of that choice to walk alone into the unknown. Jake, his voice tight, said, "You should go after her, man." Tom bristled, his silhouette tense against the moonlight. "Hell no," he shot back, but we pressed our words sharp with insistence. "If you're too scared," Jake said, his tone reckless, "I'll go." The air crackled with tension, Tom's anger flaring as he snapped, "The hell did you just say?" I gripped my sleeping bag, ready to intervene, my boots half on, prepared to chase after Sarah myself. One wrong move, and this night could unravel into chaos. The forest seemed to lean closer, its shadows whispering of danger. I thought of stories I'd heard, hikers, vanishing trails, hiding secrets older than the trees. Sarah was out there alone, her anger blinding her to the risks. Imagine her steps, each one a defiance, each one a step deeper into the unknown. My pulse raced as I stood ready to act when a scream tore through the night. A sound so raw, so primal, it stopped my heart. A second scream followed, and the shelter erupted into motion. Tom was already moving his flashlight, a frantic beam, as he sprinted toward the sound, Jake and I scrambling behind our boots, pounding the earth, the forest closing in around us. The trail was a tunnel of darkness, our flashlights carving feeble paths through the black. Sarah's screams echoed, each one a jagged wound in the night, guiding us like a beacon. Feel the panic the way it claws at your chest, urging you to run faster. Tom was a blur ahead, his speed unnatural, driven by fear or guilt or both. Jake and I stumbled after branches, snagging at our clothes, the forest alive with unseen eyes. The air was thick with the scent of pine and fear. Every snap of a twig, a gunshot in my ears. You're running now, heart pounding, knowing something terrible waits ahead. We found her just off the trail, crumpled in the dirt, her leg bent at a sickening angle. See it, the pale glow of her skin, the unnatural twist of bone, the terror in her eyes. She was screaming, not just from pain, but from something worse. He's here. He's still here, she cried, her voice ragged, her finger pointing into the void. I knelt beside her, my hands shaking as I checked her leg, the bone clearly shattered. Tom was at her side, his face a mask of horror, whispering her name like a prayer. Who's here? I asked, my voice barely steady, but her eyes were wild, darting to the trees. The person who broke my leg, she gasped. Stop and feel the chill. Someone out there, watching, waiting. Jake swung his flashlight in frantic arcs, the beam slicing through the darkness, but revealing nothing. No figure, no threat. Just the endless press of trees. My hands fumbled with Sarah's pack, searching for anything to stabilize her leg. But her words looped in my mind. He's still here. My skin prickled, every shadow, a potential attacker, every rustle a step closer. We lifted her, Tom and I supporting her. Wait, her screams piercing my ears as we moved. Jake kept watch, his flashlight trembling, his voice hoarse as he called, I don't see anyone. But the forest felt alive, its silence a lie, hiding something or someone ready to strike. The trek back to the shelter was a nightmare, each step a gamble against the unseen. Imagine carrying her, her pain radiating through you, knowing the attacker could be paces away. My heart pounded, expecting a blow from the dark, a club, a stick, something to shatter us, as it had her. Sarah's whimpers were a constant reminder of the violence that had found her, and I couldn't shake the image of a figure lurking just beyond our lights, waiting for us to falter. We reached the shelter breathless and laid her on the platform, but the safety of those wooden walls felt like a cruel illusion. Back in the shelter, we barricaded ourselves with fear and makeshift weapons. What would you do trapped in a wooden box, knowing a predator prowls outside? Sarah lay on the platform, her leg splinted with branches and torn fabric, her face pale as moonlight. Tom stayed close, his hand gripping hers, his eyes haunted by guilt. Jake and I armed ourselves with knives and a hatchet, their blades glinting in the dim glow of our flashlights. Feel the weight of that steel in your hand, the only thing between you and the dark. The shelter creaked under the weight of the night. Every sound a threat, the wind a branch, or something worse. Sarah's voice was weak but urgent, recounting the attack. I didn't see his face, she said, her words trembling. He came from the side, hit my leg with something, a stick, a club, and ran. Picture it, a shadow striking from nowhere, then vanishing into the trees. She was certain it was a man, her certainty chilling me. We took turns patrolling our flashlights, sweeping the perimeter, the beams too weak against the forest's depth. You're standing guard now, every muscle tense, waiting for the glint of eyes in the dark. The night stretched on endless, each hour a battle against fear and exhaustion. We were defenseless against a gun, our lights making us targets, but no one came. The forest kept its secrets. By dawn, the world softened, but the terror lingered. We fashioned a stretcher from branches and carried Sarah to Hampton, her pain a constant weight. Feel the strain in your arms, the fear still gripping your heart. In town, we got her medical care, filed a police report, and stayed to support Tom through the chaos. The police were useless, offering no leads, no comfort. Sarah's leg healed, but the trail's shadow never left us. Think of it. You're safe now, but the forest's eyes still watch, waiting. We skipped 10 miles of the trail, unable to face its ghosts, and I slept with my knife close for the rest of the trip. The memory of that night carved into my bones. Every step I took into that basement apartment felt like descending into a trap, though I didn't know it then. The air was thick with the musty scent of forgotten things and the faint hum of a world above that didn't want me. My brother Luke's smile was warm, but his wife Miriam's eyes, those cold, piercing eyes, cut through me like a blade promising a war I wasn't ready for. I'd always been the odd one out in my family, not for lack of love, but for the way my body refused to conform to the world's expectations. Fat, they called it, though I preferred full of life. Food was my comfort, my joy, a rebellion against a world that demanded I shrink myself. When college didn't work out, and my parents' disappointment pushed me out of their home, Luke stepped in, like the hero he'd always been. His basement apartment, once an Airbnb venture, was now my refuge. Or so I thought. At 22, I was naive, clinging to the belief that family meant safety. Luke, my protector, since childhood, had taught me to laugh off the world's judgments. His wife, Miriam, was another story. She was everything. I wasn't. Slender, poised, a vision of discipline with her kale smoothies and yoga routines. Her beauty was a weapon sharpened by years of restraint, and she wielded it with a quiet venom. The day I moved in, her lips curled as she watched me haul my boxes down the creaky stairs. Luke was all smiles, helping me carry my life in cardboard. But Miriam lingered at the top of the stairs, her arms crossed, her gaze a silent accusation. "How long are you staying?" she asked. Her voice clipped, as if my presence was an inconvenience she'd already calculated. I laughed it off, promising it'd be temporary, but her eyes didn't soften. They were a warning, a storm brewing in the distance. The basement was a world apart, a dim cave with a small kitchen and a single window that let in slivers of light. I told myself it was cozy, a place to rebuild. I'd applied for jobs, pizza parlors, coffee shops, even a fancy restaurant, hoping to turn my love for food into a career. Luke believed in me, his laughter filling the house as we cooked together, reminiscing about Grandma's recipes. But Miriam's presence was a shadow, always there, always watching. At dinner, her fork scraped her plate with surgical precision, while I savored every bite of Luke's lasagna. Her silence was louder than words, a judgment etched in every glance at my plate. I tried to ignore it, to focus on Luke's stories, but her disdain was a weight pressing down on my chest. That first night, as I lay on the lumpy mattress, the basement walls seemed to close in. The hum of the house above Luke's footsteps. Miriam's soft voice felt like a world I wasn't allowed to enter. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd find a job, save up, and leave. But deep down, a chill settled in my bones. Miriam's eyes weren't just cold. They were predatory, and I was the prey she'd marked from the moment I arrived. I didn't know then how far she'd go to erase me from her perfect life, or how her hatred would awaken something fierce within me. But that night, as the darkness pressed against the window, I felt the first stirrings of a fight I didn't yet understand. The kitchen was a battlefield, and Miriam's words were shrapnel slicing through the air with a precision that left me bleeding. "How can you eat so much?" She spat, her voice a hiss that echoed in my skull long after dinner ended. I laughed, but it was a hollow sound, masking the dread that her hatred wasn't just dislike. It was a promise of destruction. Miriam's hostility grew like mold in the corners of that house, silent but pervasive. At first, it was subtle, a curled lip. When I took seconds, a pointed comment about discipline. But it wasn't just my weight she despised. It was my existence. Luke and I had a bond forged in childhood, a shared laughter that filled rooms, and Miriam hated it. She hated that I was loved, that my family's warmth embraced me, despite my flaws. Her world was one of control, of starvation, diets, and mirrored perfection, and I was a walking defiance of everything she valued. Dinner became a ritual of tension. Luke cooked with love, his dishes a reminder of our grandmother's kitchen, where food was a celebration. I ate with gusto, savoring the flavors, while Miriam picked at her salad, her fork a metronome of judgment. One night, she broke the silence. "Being obese isn't a joke," she said, her voice low but venomous. "You'll regret it later, you know. People judge you for how you look." I felt Luke tense beside me, his fork pausing midair. I forced a smile, my heart pounding. "It's okay, Miriam. The people I care about love me as I am." Luke chuckled, backing me up, but Miriam's face hardened, her eyes glinting like sharpened steel. That moment, I saw the depth of her loathing, not just for me, but for the idea that I could be happy in a body she deemed unworthy. The days that followed were a slow unraveling. I stayed in the basement, emerging only for meals, but Miriam's presence was inescapable. The kitchen cabinets were suddenly locked, a shiny padlock glinting mockingly. I had my own food downstairs, but the message was clear. I was an intruder not to be trusted. Then my car keys vanished. I'd left them on the counter, but they were gone, and Miriam's denial was too quick, too practiced. "Maybe you misplaced them," she said, her lips twitching with something like satisfaction. I asked to borrow her car for a job interview, and her response was a slap. "Walk. You need the exercise." Her words stung, but it was her smile, cold, triumphant, that made my skin crawl. I walked to the bus stop, my heart heavy with humiliation. Luke found the keys, later buried in the backyard flower beds, a place I never went near due to my pollen allergies. He told me to let it go, but his voice was strained, as if he sensed the darkness in his wife, but couldn't face it. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, but the truth was clawing at me. Miriam wasn't just unkind. She was calculated, a predator, toying with her prey. Each act was a step toward pushing me out, toward breaking me. And as I lay awake in that basement, the walls whispering with her malice, I realized I wasn't just fighting for a place to stay. I was fighting for my survival in a house where I was no longer welcome. My dreams of a new start crumbled like ash when the pizza place manager's voice turned cold over the phone. "We can't hire someone who steals," he said, and my world tilted. Someone had poisoned my name, and I knew exactly who. Miriam's shadow loomed larger than ever, her hatred now a weapon aimed at my future. The job rejections piled up like unanswered prayers. I'd applied everywhere: pizza joints, coffee shops, even a high-end restaurant where I dreamed of turning my love for food into a career. But each call ended the same: a polite no, or worse, silence. I thought it was bad luck until the pizza place manager let slip the truth. Someone had called, warning him I was a thief, a liar, who'd pilfered food from every job I'd ever had. I begged, tears streaming down my face, swearing it was a lie. Maybe it was pity, or maybe no one else applied, but he gave me a chance. I hung up my hands, shaking, and sat on the basement floor, the truth sinking in like a stone. Miriam knew every job I'd applied for. I'd told Luke at dinner, her silent presence soaking up every word. She wasn't just mocking me. She was dismantling my life piece by piece. I threw myself into work, taking every shift I could, eating alone in the basement to avoid her gaze. The pizza place was a lifeline, a noisy chaos of flour and grease that kept me grounded. But even there, I felt her reach. Customers' stares lingered too long, as if they'd heard whispers of my supposed crimes. I kept my head down, saving every penny, planning my escape. But the basement was a prison, its walls closing in with each passing day. I avoided the main house, but laundry forced me upstairs, a task I dreaded. The laundry room was Miriam's domain, a place where her control was absolute. I moved quietly, loading clothes into the machine, my heart pounding, as if I were trespassing in a lion's den. I thought I could avoid her, but Miriam was a storm that sought me out. One afternoon, as I folded clothes, she burst in her face, twisted with a fury I'd never seen. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice a raw, jagged thing. "I can't stand you anymore. Get out of my house." I froze her words. A physical blow. She stepped closer, her eyes wild, her voice rising to a shriek. If it was up to me, Luke would never see your fat ass again. The air was thick with her rage, and I felt small, exposed, a mouse cornered by a cat. I stammered, promising to leave once I got my paycheck, but it wasn't enough. She lunged her fingers, tangling in my hair, yanking with a force that burned my scalp. I pushed back instinct, overriding fear, and she stumbled, hitting the wall with a thud that echoed like a gunshot. She screamed, accusing me of assault, her voice a siren of lies as she dialed 911. I stood trembling as Luke rushed in his face, pale with shock. The police arrived, my parents close behind, and the room became a chaos of voices. Miriam's accusations, my desperate explanations, my father's calm intervention. The cops left unconvinced by her hysterics, but the damage was done. I packed my things, tears blurring my vision, and fled to my parents' house. As I sobbed into my mother's arms, I realized Miriam's hatred wasn't just personal. It was a calculated campaign to erase me. But something stirred inside me, a spark of defiance. She'd tried to break me, but I wasn't broken yet. The laundry room attack wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my rebellion. Miriam thought she'd won, that her lies and violence had driven me out. But as I stood in my parents' home, her venom still burning in my veins, I vowed she wouldn't have the last word. I'd make her pay, not with fists, but with the one thing she couldn't stand, my unapologetic existence. I called Luke the next day, my voice steady, despite the ache in my chest. I apologized, not for what happened, but for the rift between us. He sounded weary, torn between his wife and his sister, but he didn't want to lose me. I told him I wouldn't return, but I wouldn't let Miriam sever our bond. That call was the first step, a quiet declaration of war. I wasn't going to hide anymore. If Miriam wanted me gone, I'd make sure she choked on my presence. I became a fixture in Luke's life, louder and bolder than ever. I showed up for dinner every night, my laughter filling their house, my plate piled high with Luke's cooking. I praised his skills, reminiscing about our childhood, each memory a jab at Miriam's control. She sat in silence, her fork scraping her plate, her eyes burning holes into me. I invited Luke to outings, movies, hikes, barbecues, always adding, "Bring Miriam, of course." Her forced smiles were a victory, each one a crack in her facade. I could feel her unraveling her hatred, a live wire sparking in the air. At work, I thrived. The pizza place became my stage where I charmed customers and earned tips that piled up in my savings. I was saving for an apartment, but more than that, I was rebuilding myself. I danced to Zumba videos in my parents' living room, my body moving with a joy Miriam could never understand. I wasn't shrinking for her or anyone else. My parents, once disappointed, now saw my strength, and their support was a shield against her malice. The final battle came at my father's 55th birthday. Barbecue. I was everywhere, laughing, telling stories, posing for photos, the life of the party. Miriam watched from the sidelines, her face a mask of barely contained rage. I knew she was seething, and I wanted her to break. In the kitchen, as I cleared plates, she cornered me, her voice a low hiss. "I know what you're doing," she said, her eyes wild with accusation. "You think you're clever, stealing Luke's attention." I laughed, not out of joy, but because her desperation was pathetic. "Luke loves me because I'm his sister," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "He could leave you, but I'll always be here." Her hand shot out, grabbing my hair, pulling with a fury that made my vision blur. She screamed, calling me fat, ugly, worthless, vowing to make Luke hate me. I struggled, pain searing my scalp, but before I could fight back, Luke was there, pulling her away. My parents stood in the doorway, their faces etched with shock and fury. The party froze, eyes on Miriam, as she ranted her lies, unraveling before everyone. Luke's voice was a whisper, cold and final. "Get out." She left her rage a fading echo, and I stood tall, my heart pounding with triumph. I'd exposed her, and she'd lost everything. Miriam's defeat was a wildfire consuming her perfect life in a blaze of truth. As Luke pushed her out of our lives, I stood in the kitchen, my hair still stinging, but my heart soaring. I'd faced her darkness, and won not by sinking to her level, but by shining so brightly she couldn't stand the light. The barbecue resumed, but the air was different, charged with whispers about Miriam's outburst. Guests asked questions, their eyes wide with curiosity, and I told them the truth, her lies, her attack, her hatred. My parents listened, their anger at Miriam matched by their pride in me. Luke was quiet, carrying my boxes to my car later that night, his silence heavy with guilt. I didn't push him. I knew he was grieving the life he'd thought he had. But as I drove away, I felt free, unshackled from the basement and her venom. Luke filed for divorce soon after. He stayed with us for a while. The house he'd shared with Miriam sold to settle their affairs. He apologized endlessly, his voice breaking, as he admitted he'd ignored the signs of her cruelty. I forgave him, not because it was easy, but because he was my brother, my protector, even if he'd faltered. He started dating again, a kind woman who laughed at my jokes and ate my cooking with gusto. Miriam faded into obscurity, her name a cautionary tale among our family and friends. I moved into a small studio apartment, paid for with my pizza place earnings. It was modest, but it was mine, a space where I could dance, cook, and live without judgment. My parents visited often, their pride a warmth that filled the room. I kept working my love for food, growing into plans for a catering business, a dream that felt within reach. The scars of Miriam's hatred lingered, every mirror reminded me of her cruel words, but I refused to let them define me. I was fat, yes, but I was also funny, kind, and unstoppable. Looking back, I realized Miriam's hatred wasn't just about me. It was her own insecurities, her fear of a world that didn't bow to her control. Her drug issues whispered about later by Luke explained her volatility, but they didn't excuse it. I felt a pang of pity, but it was fleeting. She'd tried to break me, to erase me, but I'd turned her weapon against her. By being myself, loud, joyful, unapologetic, I'd exposed her for what she was. The party, the photos, the laughter, it wasn't just revenge. It was survival. I'd walked through her fire and emerged stronger, surrounded by a family that loved me, flaws and all. As I sit in my apartment now, the scent of fresh bread filling the air, I know I've won. Not just against Miriam, but against the part of me that once believed I had to shrink to be loved. I'm still here, still me, and that's the greatest victory of all. In the heart of the Pennsylvania woods, where the Appalachian Trail weaves through ancient trees and whispers secrets older than time, my friends and I stumbled upon something that turned a carefree hike into a nightmare we couldn't shake. It wasn't a shadow in the dark or a rustle in the leaves. It was a rusted tin box buried under a rock, holding words that clawed at our minds and refused to let go. The sun hung low over the Appalachian Trail near Allentown, Pennsylvania, casting golden streaks through the dense canopy of oaks and maples. My friends, Jake, Matt, and Sarah and I were 3 days into our hike, our boots caked with mud, our laughter echoing off the rocks. We'd stopped at a cluster of boulders, their surfaces worn smooth by years of travelers, to catch our breath and share a water bottle. The air smelled of pine and earth, heavy with the promise of an evening chill. Jake, always restless, stood to stretch his legs, pacing around the largest rock. That's when he froze his hand, hovering over something half buried in the dirt. "Guys, what the hell is this?" His voice cracked sharp enough to cut through our chatter. He bent down and pulled out a small rusted tin box, the kind you'd imagine holding old candies or sewing supplies. Its hinged lid creaked as he pried it open, revealing 2 folded pieces of paper, stained and brittle, as if they'd been waiting for us for years. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the birds falling silent, the wind pausing as if to listen. Jake unfolded the first paper, his fingers trembling slightly. On one side was a crude drawing, jagged lines forming rocks and trees, eerily similar to the very spot where we stood. The resemblance sent a shiver down my spine, like the trail itself was watching us. He flipped the paper over, and his face drained of color. This was the last thing Sarah ever saw, he read, aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. My stomach lurched, not just at the words, but at the name. Our Sarah, standing right beside me, let out a nervous laugh, but her eyes were wide with fear. Who writes something like that? I thought, my mind racing. Was it a sick prank? A relic of some deranged hiker's imagination? Or something worse? Matt grabbed the second paper, unfolding it with a frown. His expression darkened as he read, "List of people I want to apologize to." The note listed names, strangers we didn't know, followed by short descriptions of thefts, money, jewelry, trust. The handwriting was shaky, as if written in a frenzy. The ink smudged like tears had fallen on the page. The four of us stood frozen, the tin box lying open on the rock, like a Pandora's box we'd unwittingly unleashed. Feel the weight of those words, I told myself, trying to anchor my racing thoughts. The forest, once a place of adventure, now felt like a trap, its shadows stretching longer, its silence heavier. Jake suggested it might be a suicide note, but the third-person phrasing Sarah felt too deliberate, too sinister. Matt argued it could be a killer's confession, a taunt left for someone to find. Sarah, her voice trembling, whispered, "What if whoever wrote this is still out here?" We tried to laugh it off, to break the tension, but the words on those papers clung to us like damp moss. "Look around you," my mind screamed. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig felt like a warning. We couldn't just walk away, not with those words burning in our heads. The trail, once a path to freedom, now felt like a maze with no exit, and the tin box was the first clue to something we weren't sure we wanted to understand. The fading sunlight painted the rocks in hues of orange and shadow, but the warmth did nothing to ease the chill that had settled in our bones. We huddled around the tin box, the two papers spread out on the boulder, like evidence in a trial we didn't want to be part of. This was the last thing Sarah ever saw. The words echoed in my head, a relentless loop that drowned out the forest's hum. Sarah clutched her backpack straps, her knuckles white, her eyes darting to the trees as if expecting someone to emerge. "It's just a prank," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. He paced, kicking at the dirt, trying to shake off the unease. Some idiot thought it'd be funny to scare hikers. Matt disagreed, his brow furrowed as he studied the papers. "The handwriting's different," he said, holding them up to the light. The apology note was scrawled in a shaky script, the ink uneven, while the drawing's text was steadier, more deliberate. What if two people wrote these, one confessing one? Warning. The idea hit us like a gust of cold wind. What if the notes weren't a joke? What if they were a message, a marker left by someone who'd done something unspeakable? I tried to picture it, a hiker alone in these woods, writing an apology for thefts, maybe driven by guilt. But the other note, the one about Sarah, felt like a threat, a declaration of intent. Why our Sarah's name? I asked, my voice steady, but my heart pounding. Sarah shook her head, her breath shaky. I don't know. I've never been here before. We debated what to do next. Jake wanted to shove the papers back into the tin and keep hiking, pretending we'd never found it. We're not detectives, he said, but his eyes kept scanning the trees. Matt, ever the skeptic, suggested we search the area for signs of a body or a struggle. If this is real, there might be evidence nearby, he said, his voice low, as if afraid the forest was listening. Sarah was quiet, her fear palpable, her gaze fixed on the drawing of the rocks and trees. It's like they knew we'd be here, she whispered. Feel the ground beneath you. I told myself, trying to stay grounded. The earth was soft, disturbed by years of hikers, but I couldn't help imagining a shallow grave hidden under the leaves. We spread out, moving cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Every step felt like a violation, as if we were trespassing on a secret the forest wanted to keep. We found nothing, no bones, no blood, just endless trees and silence. But the absence of evidence only deepened our unease. What if the writer was watching us right now? The debate turned heated. Jake accused Matt of overthinking, while Matt snapped back, "You're just scared to face what this might mean." Sarah's silence was the loudest of all, her fear anchoring us to the spot. "We can't ignore this," I said, finally, my voice cutting through their argument. "These notes aren't random. They're meant to be found." The realization settled over us like a fog, thick and suffocating. We were no longer just hikers. We were witnesses to something we didn't fully understand. And the forest felt like it was closing in. Night was falling fast, the sky bruising purple above the treetops. The tin box sat on the rock, its contents now folded back inside. But its presence loomed like a curse we couldn't undo. "We need to take this to the police," I said, my voice firm, despite the tremor in my chest. The others nodded, but the decision felt like a surrender, an admission that we were in over our heads. "What if it's nothing?" Jake asked, his bravado crumbling. "What if it's everything Matt countered his flashlight beam, sweeping the darkness?" We packed the tin box into my backpack, its weight heavier than it should have been. The trail to the next town was a few miles away, and every step felt like a gamble. Keep moving, I told myself, anchoring my fear to the rhythm of my boots. The forest was alive now, its sounds amplified in the dark crickets chirping, branches creaking the distant howl of something we couldn't name. Sarah stayed close, her breath ragged, her eyes darting to every shadow. "What if they're still out here?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The notes had fractured our group, planting seeds of doubt and fear. Who was Sarah? Was it our Sarah, or another lost to these woods? The apology list haunted me. Names of strangers, their lives tangled in theft and regret. What kind of person writes a list like that? I wondered, my mind spinning stories within stories. A thief seeking redemption, a killer leaving a trail of clues, or a prankster laughing at our panic. Each possibility felt like a trap, pulling us deeper into the mystery. When we reached the town, the police station was a small, fluorescent-lit building that felt like a sanctuary. We spilled our story to a tired officer who listened with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Could be a prank," he said, turning the tin box over in his hands. "But we'll look into it." He took our contact information, promising to follow up, but his tone suggested he'd seen too many strange trail stories to take ours seriously. We left the station feeling deflated, the weight of the notes still clinging to us. Feel the relief, but don't trust it, I thought, as we checked into a motel for the night. The forest was behind us, but its shadows followed. We barely spoke, each of us lost in our own thoughts, replaying the words on those papers. This was the last thing Sarah ever saw. The phrase looped in my mind, a trance that kept me awake, staring at the motel ceiling. Was it a warning, a confession, or something else entirely? Years later, we never heard back from the police. The tin box and its notes became a story we told in hushed tones, a memory that tightened our throats. The Appalachian Trail is vast, its secrets buried in dirt and shadow, and we'd brushed against one we couldn't unravel. "You'll never forget this," I told myself, the words anchoring me to that moment, to the fear that still lingers when I think of those papers and the name they carried. In the dead of night, under a moonless sky, the hills of Bakersville hum with secrets, tales of curses, and omens that cling to the soul like damp fog. Growing up in North Carolina's Appalachian heart, where the forests of Pisgah Cherokee and Nantahala converge, I was steeped in a world where superstition wasn't just folklore, it was gospel. My grandmother, God rest her, swore that a dimple on a man's chin marked the devil's footprint, a sign of calamity waiting to strike. She'd clutch her rosary and warn that washing clothes on a Sunday invited ruin, or that an odd number of eggs from her hens foretold disaster. These weren't quaint sayings. They were the ironclad rules of a woman who saw the world as a tapestry of signs woven with threads of fate and fear. In Bakersville, a town nestled 16 miles from Tennessee's border, the air carried a strange weight. The Appalachian Trail snaked nearby, its paths whispering of things unseen, spirits, shadows, and stories that made your skin crawl. Among them, one tale stood out, told in hushed tones by kids daring each other. At dusk, the witch of Rattlesnake Ridge. They said she lived in a shack deep in the woods, her chimney puffing smoke that smelled of burning secrets. My friend Scoot, wide-eyed and earnest, swore his cousin had seen her a crone who cursed 4 men to their graves after the war. I laughed it off, calling his cousin a liar, but the seed was planted. What if the stories were true? The thought gnawed at me, a splinter in my mind, urging me to prove it false or face the consequences. At 12, I was bold, or maybe just foolish, convinced the world bent to logic. Scoot's tale of the witch felt like a challenge, a dare to unravel the myth. I demanded he take me to her shack to show me this so-called sorceress. He hesitated, his freckled face paling, but pride won out. We'd go, he said, to the southeastern slope of Rattlesnake Ridge, where his cousin claimed the witch's fire burned. The plan was set for a Saturday afternoon, a time when the woods felt safe under the sun's gaze. Yet as we packed our bags with water and courage, a chill settled in my bones. The forest wasn't just trees and trails. It was a living thing, watching, waiting. Step carefully, my grandmother's voice echoed in my head, or the hills will claim you. The superstitions of Appalachia weren't just stories. They were warnings. Every creak of a branch, every rustle in the underbrush felt like the land itself whispering caution. As Scoot and I prepared to venture toward Rattlesnake Ridge, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to cross a line, one drawn not by men, but by something older, darker. The witch, real or not, was a symbol of the unknown, and I was about to stare it in the face. Would we find a harmless old woman, or something far worse? The question hung heavy, like the humid air before a storm, as we stepped into the shadows of the ridge. The forest closed around us, its shadows swallowing the sunlight, as if daring us to turn back. Scoot and I trudged through the woods, the trail to Rattlesnake Ridge, winding like a serpent through dense pines and gnarled oaks. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, the kind that clings to your clothes and reminds you how small you are. At 12, I thought I knew the woods. My father had taught me to tread heavily, to scare off rattlers, to read the land like a map. But this hike felt different. Every snap of a twig sent my heart racing, my bravado crumbling under the weight of Scoot's nervous chatter about his cousin's tale. "She's real," he insisted, his voice barely above a whisper. "She'll curse us if we get too close." I scoffed, but my eyes darted to the trees, half expecting a figure to emerge. The ridge loomed ahead, a hulking silhouette against the afternoon sky, its slopes cloaked in a haze that seemed to pulse with secrets. Scoot's cousin had been specific. The witch's shack lay on the southeastern side, marked by smoke curling from a stone chimney. I told myself it was just a campfire, maybe a hunter's, but the deeper we went, the more the forest seemed to watch us. The birds fell silent, their songs replaced by a stillness that pressed against my eardrums. "Keep moving," I told myself. "Prove it's nothing." But doubt crept in cold and sharp, like a blade against my spine. We wove through thickets of wax myrtle, their waxy leaves brushing against our arms, leaving a faint, bitter scent. The ground was uneven, roots twisting underfoot, like traps set by the earth itself. Scoot lagged behind, his breaths short, and panicked, muttering about turning back. I pushed forward, driven by a need to disprove the myth, to show him and myself that fear was just a trick of the mind. There's no witch. I repeated a mantra to drown out the growing unease. But then it hit us, a faint whiff of smoke, acrid and unnatural, curling through the air like a warning. Scoot froze his eyes wide. "That's her," he whispered, pointing to a faint gray plume rising beyond the trees. "Run now," a voice in my head urged, but my feet stayed rooted, drawn to the source, like a moth to flame. The smoke grew thicker as we neared its scent, stinging my nostrils, heavy with something metallic, almost alive. My heart pounded each beat, a reminder of how far we'd strayed from safety. The ridge's shadow stretched over us, cold and oppressive, as if the land itself disapproved of our intrusion. I wanted to laugh, to call it a coincidence, but the air felt wrong, charged with an energy I couldn't name. What if Scoot's right? The thought clawed at me, relentless, as we pushed through the final stretch of myrtle, the shack's outline emerging like a specter in the haze. The shack stood like a wound in the forest, its weathered boards bleeding secrets into the earth. We crouched behind a cluster of myrtles, hearts hammering as the log cabin came into full view. It was small, barely more than a single room, its roof sagging under years of neglect. A stone chimney jutted from one side, spewing that eerie smoke now thick enough to burn my throat. Beside the door, a broom leaned against the wall, its handle worn and splintered, surrounded by dried herbs and strange bone-like charms swaying in the breeze. Scoot's breath hitched, his finger jabbing toward the broom. "See, I told you," he hissed, his voice trembling with a fear that mirrored my own. "This is real." I thought my earlier bravado dissolving like mist. The shack's windows were dark, their glass cracked or missing, like empty eyes staring back. The air around it felt heavy, as if the place itself exhaled dread. I tried to focus, to find a rational explanation. A hermit, a recluse, anything but a witch. But the charms rattled softly, their sound a low, mocking chant. My skin prickled, every nerve screaming to flee, yet I couldn't look away. What lives here? The question burned unanswered as the forest held its breath. Then the door creaked open, and my blood turned to ice. She stepped out. Dora Ann, though we didn't know her name then. Her hair was a tangle of white, patchy, and thin, like cobwebs clinging to a skull. She moved with a stoop, her body bent under the weight of years, her face etched with lines that told of pain no child could fathom. A wart, or maybe a scar, marked her chin, catching the dim light like a beacon of menace. Scoot's voice broke the silence, a shaky, "There she is," that shattered the stillness. Her head snapped toward us, eyes narrowing into slits that seemed to pierce the myrtle veil. "Who's there?" she croaked, her voice raw, like gravel scraped across bone. "Run!" My mind screamed, but my legs were lead-trapped by the weight of her gaze. We bolted branches, clawing at our faces, the forest a blur of green and shadow. Her voice chased us a guttural command. "Y'all better show yourselves." Each word felt like a curse sinking into my soul, promising retribution. My lungs burned, my vision tunneled, but I ran, Scoot's panicked gasps echoing beside me. The ridge seemed to shift its paths, twisting to keep us lost, as if it conspired with her to trap us. She'll find us. I thought the terror so vivid, I could taste it bitter and metallic. We didn't stop until we reached our homes, collapsing in tears, convinced we'd been marked for death by the witch of Rattlesnake Ridge. Decades later, in a smoky bar, an old man's voice pulled me back to the ridge, his words unraveling a truth darker than any curse. It was 2004, and Scoot and I, now grown, sat in a near-empty bar in Burnsville, reminiscing over beers. The Panthers had lost, but I'd won at pool, and the night felt light until we mentioned the witch. Laughter turned to curiosity as we wondered why she'd lived alone, why 4 men's deaths were tied to her name. The bar was quiet, save for the clink of glasses and the low hum of a jukebox when an older man at the counter turned to us, his eyes sharp, despite his weathered face, held a knowing glint. "I got a story for you boys," he said, sliding us fresh beers. "About your witch." He called her Dora Ann Quinlan, not a witch, but a woman broken by betrayal. His voice was low, deliberate, each word a stone dropped into the still waters of my memory. I mocked him at first, the beer loosening my tongue, joking about broomsticks and frog curses. But his glare silenced me, his words cutting through the haze. "Sit your ass down, or take your beer and jump in a lake." I sat the weight of his tone, anchoring me to the stool. "Listen," it demanded, "and learn what fear really means." He spoke of Dora's marriage to James Cranwell, a man torn from her by war, declared dead in 1942 after a massacre in North Africa. She mourned, then found solace with a grocery clerk. Their affair, a quiet rebellion against grief. But James returned, a skeletal ghost of the man she'd loved, his mind warped by captivity. The town welcomed him as a hero, but Dora's heart was divided. Her mistake was continuing the affair, a secret that unraveled one drunken night when James found her with the clerk. The old man's voice grew heavy, his eyes distant, as he described James's rage, beating the clerk, forcing his friends to join in a brutal assault on Dora. They dragged the clerk into the woods. His life ended with a bullet, his body hidden where the corpse hounds later lost the scent. "Feel the weight of her pain," the old man seemed to say, his story pulling me into Dora's world, where love turned to violence and justice was a distant dream. The bar felt colder, the air thick with the ghost of Dora's suffering. Scoot and I exchanged glances, the boyhood fear of the witch replaced by a deeper human horror. The old man leaned closer, his breath sour with whiskey. "She didn't curse them," he said, "but someone did." The words hung there, a promise of more, as the jukebox flickered and the night pressed in around us. The ridge holds its secrets, but vengeance has a way of breaking free, like blood seeping through cracked earth. The old man's tale wove on each word a thread in a tapestry of tragedy. Dora Ann, cast out by James, limped into Bakersville, her body bruised, her spirit shattered. She told the sheriff everything. James's violence, the clerk's murder, but without a body, her words were just whispers against a war hero's denial. The town pitied her, but pity wasn't justice. James and his friends walked free, their crimes buried in the ridge's shadows. Dora retreated to her parents' home, her world reduced to a childhood bedroom, where despair clung like damp rot. Imagine her pain. The old man urged his voice, a command that rooted me to the present while pulling me into her past. Then came the night that changed everything. In 1946, Bakersville woke to chaos. James's house burned to ash, his body presumed inside. His two friends met equally grim fates. One crashed into a tree on a clear road, the other poisoned by tainted whiskey. The state patrol swarmed the town, asking questions no one could answer. To the townsfolk, it was coincidence, a cruel twist of fate. But whispers grew Dora Ann had cursed them. When she heard of their deaths, she smiled her first in months and began her daily treks to Rattlesnake Ridge, searching for her lover's body. Feel her resolve. The old man's story demanded painting her, not as a witch, but a woman driven by loss, her every step, a defiance of the world that failed her. Years later, she built her shack, a solitary refuge where she could hunt for the clerk's remains undisturbed. The town let her be their guilt and fear, weaving the myth of the witch. The old man's voice softened, his eyes glinting with something like respect. She didn't need magic, he said. Someone avenged her. Whether it was Dora, a vigilante, or the ridge itself, no one knew. But the deaths of those men tied to her pain birthed the legend that haunted us as kids. Believe in justice, his story seemed to say, even when it wears a witch's face. Scoot and I sat silent, the bar's dim light casting long shadows. The witch we'd feared was no sorceress, but a woman betrayed her life, a wound that never healed. The ridge, with its smoke and secrets, was her sanctuary, not a lair of evil. Yet the fear lingered not of curses, but of the human capacity for cruelty, and the lengths one might go to right it. Dora Ann's story was no campfire tale. It was a mirror, reflecting the darkness we all carry, waiting to be unleashed. I stood frozen in the living room, my phone trembling in my hands, staring at a message from Paula that clawed at my chest. "Are you okay? What's going on with your work?" My heart pounded a sickening rhythm that drowned out the hum of the city outside. Why would she ask that? My life with Chad was perfect, too perfect. I should have known. The pandemic had locked us in a bubble, but it was a bubble I'd grown to love. Chad and I had been together for a year, before the world turned upside down, and moving in together felt like fate. He was the anchor to my chaos, the tech-savvy guy who could fix anything from a crashed laptop to my spiraling thoughts. Our apartment was a sanctuary, soft light filtering through sheer curtains, the smell of fresh coffee lingering in the air, and the quiet hum of our shared life. We'd saved on rent, set up a cozy office in the spare room, and I'd thrown myself into cooking, exercising, even reading novels I'd never had time for. Chad worked longer hours, his face often lit by the cold glow of his monitor, but I thought we were thriving. I'd never been happier. My mental health soared. I felt alive, vibrant, like I'd cracked the code to surviving the chaos of 2020. But Paula's message was a crack in that perfect glass dome. "What's going on with your work?" I texted back, confused, my fingers fumbling over the keys. Work was fine, better than fine. My remote job was steady, and I was even up for a promotion. Her reply never came, and that silence was the first shadow creeping into my world. I brushed it off, telling myself she was just busy. But deep down, a gnawing unease took root like a splinter I couldn't see, but could feel with every breath. Then came the night I needed my charger. Chad was in our bedroom, gaming on the new computer I'd bought him, a sleek, glowing machine meant to pull him away from work stress. I slipped in quietly, not wanting to disturb his Discord call, but a voice crackled through his headset. "Man, she's just the hottest. I can't believe you got her to..." The words cut off as I grabbed my charger and left my cheeks burning. Compliments from his friends weren't new, but something about the tone, leering possessive, made my stomach twist. I told myself it was nothing, just guys being guys. But that splinter grew sharper, digging deeper. Days later, Julie's message hit like a sledgehammer. "I'm sorry I can't be friends with someone doing that kind of stuff. You could have talked to me if money was tight." My mind reeled. Money wasn't tight. I demanded answers, and she called her voice hesitant. "You opened an OnlyFans. Everyone thinks you're doing it because you lost your job." My laughter was sharp, disbelieving, but her next words stopped me cold. "There are videos of you on public websites. You know those kinds." My world tilted. I stared at the phone, the room spinning, the air thick with betrayal. The screen glowed with images that weren't me, yet they were. Photoshopped pictures of my face on bodies in lingerie. I'd never worn videos of me exercising in our living room, my every move captured by hidden cameras. My kitchen, my sanctuary, reduced to a voyeur's playground, with one video zoomed in on my body in a way that made my skin crawl. I sat on the couch, Julie's voice still echoing through the phone, my hands shaking as I scrolled through the evidence she'd sent. This isn't me. I wanted to scream, but some of it was. The real footage, me cooking, stretching living, was stolen, twisted into something vile. I stormed into the bedroom, my vision blurring with rage. Chad was still at his computer, laughing with his Discord buddies, oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. "What did you do?" I screamed, my voice raw, tearing through the quiet. He turned his face, a mask of confusion, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, guilt, sharp and fleeting. I threw my phone at him, the images still open, and his expression crumpled. "Why are you acting like this?" he shouted, but I was beyond reason. I lunged, my fists pounding against his chest, screaming about betrayal, about the violation of my trust. His friends' voices went silent on the call, and I didn't care. Let them hear. Let them know. He grabbed my arms, pinning me still, his eyes cold now, no trace of the man I'd loved. "You're not leaving," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You're mine." My heart stopped, fear slicing through my anger. I braced for violence, for the fight of my life. But he laughed, a chilling, hollow sound that made my blood run cold. "If you leave, I'll release more. Worse things. I've got plenty." He showed me the extent of it. An OnlyFans account in my name, filled with doctored images and private moments, chats with strangers who paid for exclusive content. My body, my life, monetized without my consent. He admitted it all with a sickening calm. His job had cut his pay, and he hated that I was out-earning him. I needed to balance things out, he said, as if exposing me to the world was a logical solution. The account was profitable more than enough to cover his losses. He showed me the numbers, the payments, the subscribers, and my stomach churned. "You could join me," he suggested, his voice almost cheerful. "We could make more." I stared at him, the man I'd trusted, and saw a stranger. That night, he cooked dinner burgers and fries as if we were celebrating. I sat across from him, nodding mechanically as he rambled about real videos and future plans. But inside, my mind was racing. "You think you own me, Chad, but you've just given me the keys to your downfall." I ate my last fry, forcing a smile, and began to weave a plan. The days that followed were a descent into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I played along, pretending to embrace Chad's twisted scheme. If I'm going to escape, I need control. I demanded the passwords, insisting that as a woman, I knew what men wanted. Chad, eager to keep the money flowing, handed them over, teaching me how to manage the OnlyFans account, the chats, the uploads. Each click felt like a betrayal of myself, but I swallowed the shame. I needed to understand his world to dismantle it. The apartment became a stage. I smiled, laughed, cooked dinner, all while my skin crawled under his gaze. The cameras were still there, hidden in corners, watching my every move. I felt their invisible eyes stripping away my privacy with every step. But I watched him, too, noting his routines, his weaknesses. He was cocky, believing he'd trapped me. But I saw the crack in his armor, jealousy. Chad hated the idea of other men wanting me, even as he profited from it. That was my weapon. I started small, testing the waters. I joined a gym, bought tighter clothes, and opened a legit Instagram account. I posted photos, me in workout gear, smiling at the camera, the gym's fluorescent lights glinting off my skin. The comments rolled in, men praising my curves, my strength. Chad noticed his jaw tightening as he scrolled through my posts. "You're showing off too much," he muttered one night, his voice sharp. I laughed it off, planting the seed. "It's just business." Chad. More followers, more money. But I saw the doubt in his eyes, the flicker of insecurity. At night, I managed the OnlyFans account, answering messages from faceless subscribers, my stomach twisting with every word. I played dumb when Chad asked about the payments, shrugging off questions about who was buying what. Some guy wanted my underwear. I'd say, casually, watching his face darken. It was a lie, but it worked. He stopped asking his trust in me, fraying. I pushed harder, posting stories with gym bros, tall, muscular men who made Chad look small. I'd come home raving about their cars, their strength, knowing each word was a knife in his ego. The world was opening up again, and I used it to my advantage. I changed the passwords, added security layers, and erased the accounts from his computer. "It's my image," I told him, my voice firm. "I'm taking over." He argued, threatened to send videos to my parents, but I called his bluff. "Go ahead. I'll tell everyone you're a jealous boyfriend who can't handle my success." His friends were subscribers. He wouldn't risk the humiliation. For the first time, I felt the balance of power shift. The gym became my refuge, a place where I could breathe, even if just for a moment. The clank of weights, the hum of treadmills, the sweat-soaked air. It grounded me, reminded me I was still here, still fighting. I posted more. My Instagram, a carefully curated trap. Photos with men who towered over Chad, their arms thick, their smiles confident. I'd caption them with playful hashtags, knowing Chad would see every like, every comment. At home, I'd talk about them, casually, cruelly. That guy at the gym has a Porsche, I'd say, watching Chad's fingers tighten around his fork. He was unraveling. His laughter, once so easy, turned brittle. He'd check my phone demand to know who I was messaging. I'd shrug, saying it was business, letting him stew in his paranoia. The OnlyFans account was now mine. Every upload, every chat under my control. I scaled back the explicit content, focusing on Tamer posts, but I let Chad believe I was escalating. We're making so much, I'd say, showing him fake numbers, watching his eyes narrow. He didn't know I was funneling the money into a secret account, building my escape. One night, I came home late, my gym bag slung over my shoulder, my phone buzzing with notifications. Chad was waiting, his face pale, his eyes wild. "You're flirting with them," he accused, his voice shaking. "You're exposing yourself like some—" He trailed off, but the word hung in the air. I stared at him, my heart pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "You started this, Chad. You wanted this." His silence was deafening, a crack in the facade he'd built. The next day, I found my bags packed. He stood in the living room, his arms crossed, his voice cold. "I can't do this. You're too much. Get out." I wanted to laugh, to scream, to dance out the door, but I played the part. "This was your idea," I said, my voice breaking for effect. "You can't handle me succeeding." He claimed he'd erased everything, that he wanted no part of the money. I didn't believe him, but it didn't matter. I grabbed my things, my heart racing with victory, and left for Julie's house. That night, I told her everything. The betrayal, the cameras, the plan. She listened, her eyes wide, and when I finished, she hugged me. "You're free," she whispered. I nodded, but the weight of what I'd done lingered. I'd played his game, turned his weapon against him, but the scars remained. Freedom tasted bitter. My new apartment was small, paid for with the money I'd siphoned from Chad's scheme, but every corner felt haunted. The internet was forever those videos, those images, they'd never fully disappear. I spent nights scouring the web, shutting down what I could. But some things were out of my control. Subscribers still messaged their words, a reminder of the violation I'd endured. I'd won, but at what cost? I rebuilt my life slowly. Julie became my anchor, helping me navigate the shame, the fear. I told my family I'd gotten into fitness, explaining away the Instagram posts as a pandemic hobby. Some suspected more, but they didn't push. Work was my salvation. Long hours, a promotion, a chance to prove I was more than Chad's victim. But the nights were hard. The silence too loud, the memories too vivid. I kept tabs on Chad through mutual friends. His life unraveled after I left. His friends, once loyal, distanced themselves, embarrassed by his lies. His job suffered, his confidence shattered. I didn't gloat, not openly, but knowing he'd lost everything felt like justice. I'd used his jealousy, his ego to tear him apart, and it worked. But the victory was hollow. I'd had to become someone else, someone cunning and ruthless to survive. One night, I sat in my apartment, the city lights flickering outside, and thought about the girl I'd been before Chad. She was gone, replaced by someone stronger, but scarred. I opened my laptop, deleted the last of the accounts I could access, and closed the lid. The air felt lighter, but the weight of betrayal lingered. "You're free," I told myself, echoing Julie's words. But freedom came with a price, a piece of me I'd never get back. I don't regret what I did. Chad took my trust, my privacy, my dignity, and I took it back. But sometimes, in the quiet, I hear his voice, "You're mine," and I wonder if I'll ever truly escape him. 35 years ago, I stood before Luther, my heart swollen with love, promising to stand by him in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parted us. I believed those words were sacred, etched into the very fabric of our lives. But as I sit here now in a house that once echoed with laughter, my body trembling from the weight of betrayal, I realize those vows were nothing but whispers in the wind, beautiful, fleeting, and utterly meaningless to him. The air feels heavy tonight, thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth and the bitter tang of my own regret. I clutch the edge of the kitchen table, my knuckles whitening as memories flood back the spotless home. I kept the meals I crafted, with care the children I raised, while he chased his dreams. I was the perfect wife, wasn't I? The kind who stood tall through every storm, who held our family together when the world tried to tear us apart. But perfection, it seems, was never enough for Luther. I remember the early days when love painted every moment in hues of gold. Luther's smile could light up a room, his voice a steady anchor in my chaotic world. We built a life together, a modest house, 3 beautiful children, and dreams of growing old side by side. I was the one who scrubbed floors until they gleamed, who balanced budgets when his job vanished, during my third pregnancy. I took temp jobs, my body swollen and aching to keep us afloat. The exhaustion was a badge of honor, proof of my devotion. I'd come home to our toddlers, their sticky hands tugging at my skirt, and still find the strength to cook Luther's favorite roast. Feel the weight of those days, I tell myself, now, the way your bones ached, but your heart sang. That was love, wasn't it? Or was it just me pouring myself into a man who would one day discard me like a worn-out coat? The first crack appeared when I felt that lump in my breast, a quiet intruder that changed everything. At the doctor's office, Luther sat beside me, his face a mask of concern. The diagnosis, breast cancer, landed like a thunderclap. Early detection, highly treatable, the doctor said, but Luther's eyes were distant, his hands folded too tightly in his lap. I thought he was scared, just like me. I thought we'd face this together. But as the days turned into weeks, his presence grew thinner, like a shadow slipping away at dusk. He missed appointments, avoided my gaze when chemo left me retching into a bucket. I told myself he needed time, that he was processing the fear of losing me. How naive you were, I think now, clinging to a lie you wanted to believe. The truth was creeping in a cold dread that settled in my bones alongside the cancer. Luther wasn't scared for me. He was scared of me, of the sickness that dared to tarnish his perfect life. By the time he left, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. A note. That's all he left. I can't do this anymore. I didn't sign up for this. Words so cold, they burned. I stood in our bedroom, the note trembling in my hands, the scent of his cologne still lingering on the pillow. 35 years of devotion, of sacrifice, reduced to a few scribbled lines. I wanted to scream, to tear the house apart, but instead, I sank to the floor, my body too weak to fight the grief. You are stronger than this, I whispered to myself, a mantra to keep from breaking. But in that moment, I wasn't sure I believed it. The days after Luther's departure blurred into a haze of pain and disbelief. The chemo drained me each session, leaving me hollow, my body a battlefield of nausea and fatigue. Yet it was the betrayal that cut deeper, a wound no medicine could heal. I'd lie awake at night, the house too quiet, without the sound of his footsteps, wondering how the man I loved could abandon me when I needed him most. Feel the ache in your chest, I'd tell myself. Let it fuel you. I refused to let his cowardice define me, but the weight of it pressed down relentless. I found the evidence by accident tucked away in a drawer he'd left behind in his haste. hotel receipts, jewelry. I'd never worn tickets for vacations we never took. Each item was a dagger proof that Luther's betrayal stretched back years long before my diagnosis. He'd been building a secret life while I scrubbed his floors and raised his children. You gave him everything I thought, my hands shaking as I spread the receipts across the kitchen table. The dates mocked me, trips taken while I was pregnant, gifts bought while I was working late to pay our bills. The realization hit like a wave. My marriage had been a lie, and I'd been too busy being the perfect wife to see it. I took the evidence to my lawyer, a gruff man with kind eyes who promised to fight for me. "We'll take him to the cleaners," he said, his voice brimming with confidence. But I didn't want a war. I didn't want to be the bitter ex-wife, clawing for scraps of a life that no longer existed. I wanted something more. Something that would make Luther feel the weight of his actions, the way I felt the weight of his betrayal. "You are not the villain here," I told myself, "but you can be the one who wins." I began to craft a plan, one that would expose him without dragging me into the mud. I'd play the part of the saint, the wronged wife who rose above his cruelty. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. The divorce proceedings were a battlefield of their own. Luther's lawyer painted him as the victim, a man overwhelmed by his wife's illness. I sat in court, my body weakened by chemo, my head wrapped in a bandana, and let them see me. Not the angry woman I wanted to be, but the fragile, dignified wife who only wanted fairness. "Look at me." I thought, meeting the judge's eyes, "See what he's done." I spoke softly, my voice trembling with practiced restraint. "I just want to resolve this fairly," I said. "I don't hold anything against him." The lie tasted bitter, but it worked. Luther's demands, our house, our savings, our retirement, were denied one by one. The judge's gaze hardened when he looked at Luther, and I knew I was winning. But victory felt hollow. Luther moved on his new girlfriend, a younger woman, who draped herself across his social media like a trophy. I saw the photos, his arm around her, his smile as bright as it had been in our early days. "You don't get to be happy." I thought, my heart twisting. I wasn't done yet. I needed the world to see him for what he was, a coward who abandoned his sick wife for a shinier prize. I needed to anchor that truth in the minds of everyone who knew him. The plan took shape slowly, each step deliberate, like laying stones for a path through a storm. I'd learned from the courtroom that pity was a powerful weapon. People didn't just sympathize with a sick woman, they revered her. I decided to wield that power, not with anger, but with a quiet, devastating grace. Let them see you suffer, I told myself, and let them judge him. I began appearing in public, my appearance carefully curated to evoke sympathy. My bandana-covered head, my pale skin, the slow way I moved, they weren't just symptoms of chemo. They were my armor. I wanted Luther's world to crumble under the weight of their disapproval. My first move was to visit his office, a place where I'd once been a familiar face, dropping off lunches or picking him up after late nights. I carried a folder of papers that needed his signature, a flimsy excuse to be there. I dressed in loose, drab clothes, my face bare of makeup, my eyes sunken from sleepless nights. The receptionist's smile faltered when she saw me, her eyes darting to my bandana. Feel their pity, I thought. Let it spread. I moved slowly through the office, nodding at familiar faces, letting their whispers follow me. When Luther saw me, his face twisted with fury, but he couldn't lash out. Not here, not in front of his colleagues. I handed him the papers, my voice soft. I just want to get this over with, I said, my eyes downcast. He signed them quickly, his jaw tight, and I left without another word. But I didn't leave quietly. I stopped by his assistant's desk, a woman who'd always been kind to me. It's been rough, I said, my voice breaking. The divorce, the cancer, it's more than I ever imagined. Her eyes widened, her hand reaching for mine. She didn't know, I realized. Luther hadn't told anyone about my illness. The news would spread like wildfire, and I wanted it to burn. I left the office, feeling the weight of their stares, knowing they'd talk about the man who left his dying wife. You can't hide now, I thought, picturing Luther's face as the whispers reached him. Next, I went to his brother Ronald's house, carrying a box of Luther's belongings. Ronald and his wife, Wendy, had always been kind, but I'd avoided them, fearing they'd take Luther's side. I stood on their porch, the box heavy in my arms, my bandana slipping slightly to reveal my thinning hair. "Rose, are you sick?" Ronald asked, his voice thick with shock. I nodded, letting tears well up. "Didn't Luther tell you? He left me because he couldn't handle it." Wendy's face crumpled, her hand flying to her mouth. Let them feel your pain, I thought. Let it change how they see him. I handed them the box, my voice trembling. I just wanted to say goodbye, in case I don't see you again. It was a lie, but it landed like a blow. Wendy insisted I was family, that they'd be there for me. I thanked them, my heart racing with the knowledge that they'd spread the truth. Each move was a thread in the web I was weaving, trapping Luther in his own lies. I didn't need to scream or fight. I just needed to be seen. The world would do the rest. Wendy became my unexpected savior, her loyalty a light in the darkness of my isolation. She started coming to my chemo appointments, sitting beside me as the IV dripped her presence, a quiet strength. Feel her warmth. I told myself, you're not alone anymore. She'd bring homemade soup, her hands steady as she poured it into bowls at my kitchen table. We'd talk for hours, her voice soft but fierce as she recounted what she'd learned about Luther. He told us, you drifted apart, she said, her eyes narrowing. He never mentioned the cancer. I nodded, letting her anger fuel my resolve. He thought he could erase you, I thought, but you're still here. Wendy's outrage spread just as I'd hoped. She told her friends, who told their friends, and soon the whispers became a roar. Our town wasn't small, but it was tight-knit, and gossip traveled fast. Luther's reputation, once polished by his success, began to tarnish. People stopped inviting him to gatherings, their smiles turning cold when he passed. His new girlfriend, the young woman he'd flaunted online, started pulling away her posts, with him growing sparse. You can't outrun the truth, I thought, watching his world unravel from afar. I didn't gloat, but I felt a quiet satisfaction, like the first sip of coffee on a cold morning. Then came the day I decided to tell my children. I'd kept my illness from them, not wanting to burden them while they lived far away, building their own lives. But Wendy convinced me they deserved to know. What if something happens? She said, her voice urgent. They need to be here. I called them Anthony, Walter, and Anna, my voice shaking as I explained the cancer, the divorce, the betrayal. Hear their shock. I thought, let it bind you closer. They were furious, not just with Luther, but with me for keeping it secret. We should have been there, Mom, Anna said, her voice breaking. I promised they could visit soon, that I was getting better. The chemo was working, the doctors said, and surgery might not be necessary. For the first time in months, I felt hope. The day they arrived, I was in the kitchen, still weak from my latest treatment, the anti-nausea meds barely keeping me upright. I heard the sliding door open, a habit I'd kept from warmer days when fresh air felt like a lifeline. Brace yourself, I thought, expecting Wendy, but it was Luther, his face twisted with rage. How could you ruin my life? He spat, his voice low and venomous. I froze, the air thick with the scent of rain and his cologne, a scent that once meant home, but now felt like a threat. You are not afraid, I told myself, but my heart pounded. He accused me of turning everyone against him, of playing the martyr to steal his happiness. I wanted to laugh, at the absurdity. But then I saw his hands clench, his eyes wild with a fury I'd never seen. This is not the man you loved, I realized, stepping back. Before he could move closer, the door slid open again. Wendy stood there, her face pale but determined, and behind her were my children, Anthony, Walter, Anna, their spouses, and my grandkids. Feel their love. I thought my knees weak with relief. Luther's hands froze in the air, his anger snuffed out by their presence. My sons stepped forward, their eyes blazing, and I knew I was safe. Anthony and Walter didn't hesitate. They grabbed Luther, their hands firm but controlled, and escorted him out of the house. Feel the strength of your boys, I thought, watching them protect me as I'd once protected them. Anna and the others surrounded me, their arms a fortress against the storm of Luther's betrayal. I ran to the bathroom, the nausea overwhelming. But it wasn't just the chemo. It was the weight of what could have happened, what almost was. You survived him, I told myself, splashing cold water on my face. You won. When I emerged, Luther was gone, the house quiet except for the soft voices of my family. They were angry. I'd kept my illness secret, but their love was unshakable. Anna insisted I move in with her, and I agreed, ready to leave behind the house that held too many ghosts. Start anew. I thought you deserve it. The doctor soon confirmed I was in remission, a miracle I hadn't dared hope for. I stood in Anna's guest room, sunlight streaming through the window, and felt lighter than I had in years. Luther's absence was a gift, not a loss. The town turned its back on him, his reputation in tatters. Wendy's friends had spread the story how he'd left his sick wife, how he'd tried to take everything. His girlfriend left him unwilling to be tied to a man despised by all. You did this, I thought, not with pride, but with clarity. I hadn't screamed or fought. I'd let the truth do the work. I'd anchored his betrayal in the minds of everyone who mattered, and it had cost him everything. I think back to that vow in sickness and in health. It was sacred to me, but not to him. And yet, I kept it not for Luther, but for myself. I fought for my family, my dignity, my life. You are enough, I tell myself now. Standing in Anna's kitchen, laughter filling the air as my grandkids play. I've learned that marriage isn't the measure of a woman's worth. It's the people who stay, who hold you when you're breaking, who remind you of your strength. Wendy, my children, their love, they're my triumph. I don't know where Luther is now, and I don't care. I'm free, not just from him, but from the weight of trying to be perfect. I live for myself now, for the mornings I wake without fear, for the days I spend with those who love me as I am. Feel this freedom. I think, smiling as I sip my coffee, the rain outside a gentle reminder of storms I've weathered. I'm not the picture-perfect wife anymore. I'm Rose, and that's more than enough.